Hey, welcome to my channel. What I'm going to try to do in this video really quick, but it's not going to be quick, is cover the new proposed regulations that Transport Canada is putting forth that will come into effect in the year 2018, which is going to affect anybody who's flying an RC aircraft, a drone, well, basically anything that's unmanned. And Transport Canada, they used to call everything a UAV, but now they call everything a UAS. So that's an unmanned aircraft system. Now, the reason Transport Canada is basically making these new regulations, there's many reasons. Of course, the first one is risk to aircraft that people fly in. For some reason, Transport Canada, as well as other countries, that's their biggest worry is that one day a plane is going to crash to the ground because some tiny little drone is going to smash into the air intake or smash into the canopy and cause some damage and cause a disaster. So they're trying to mitigate that by coming out with these regulations. Another reason that they're putting forth these proposed regulations is basically they're inundated with requests by people like me who say, hey, I want to fly my drone at an event, so I need a special flight operations certificate. So those are going up in demand and they can't handle the demand anymore. Now, Transport Canada is created a little section, a little department called the UAS Task Force. So their job is basically to, once again, come up with these proposed regulations, keep them in place, modify them, monitor them, modify them as necessary, and respond to any questions from people who are having issues where one size does not fit all. So what they've done with these new proposed regulations, to make it simple, what they've done is they've made 3 categories. And the way you fall into a category is, it depends on yourself, what pilot you are, like what qualifications do you hold, how old are you, a bunch of other factors. What are you flying? You flying a little drone, a big drone? And where do you want to fly? Do you want to fly out at Mom and Pa's farm, or do you want to fly in the center of the city? So all of these things are going to drop you in a category, and if you want to do any of those on any given day, you have to meet the requirements of that category. So the first category is considered very small UAS. So very small UAS means it has to be over 250 grams to fall in this category, but less than 1 kilogram. So let me show you what are the popular drones that fall into that category. I have them behind me. A Spark and a Mavic. Those two fall into that category. So the first category that you're going to see is pretty simple. And if you're flying a Mavic or a Spark, then you're in luck. Or if you're flying something else like the Unique Breeze, any of those small drones that are less than 1 kilogram, then you should have no problem. If you're flying something like this, well then you're not in category 1. We'll get to that. So category 1, as mentioned, your drone must be 250 grams all the way up to 1 kilogram. And I've shown you the 2 drones that are the most popular that people would fly in that category. Here's the interesting part. If you're less than 14 years of age, you cannot fly in this category. So if you're less than 14 years of age, you're going to have to fly a drone that is less than 250 grams. Normal stuff, mark your device. You're going to have to pass an online test. It's going to be done online. And here's the scary part. As a 14-year-old, you're going to have $100,000 of liability insurance. So will your home insurance cover that? No idea. Does Transport Canada know who the insurance underwriters are going to be for this? No, they don't. That question's been asked. They're still working on it. So that first category is something that most people in Canada who fly RC aircraft, whatnot, they're going to fall under that one because RC aircraft are quite light. They don't weigh very much. And for drones, I've already shown you the 2 common drones that are fine in that category. So that's that one. Then say you want to fly a heavier drone like this here, like the Phantom 4 Pro, or even heavier than this, the Unique Typhoon H. Well, then you're in category number 2 or 3. So category 2 is limited UAS operation, and once again, there is an age restriction. You have to be 16 years of age to fly these larger drones, because in this category, it's no longer a 250 gram drone, but it's a 1 kilogram all the way up to 25 kilogram drone. I know that sounds crazy. If you're a recreational drone flyer like myself, you're not going to have a 25 kilogram drone. That's insane. Most drones that us recreational flyers will fly are going to be just over 1 kilogram. You also have to have $100,000 in liability insurance. Now, if you want to fly in the city center and you want to fly near an airport and all that other good stuff, well, then you fall in Category 3. Transport Canada wants to make sure you really know what you're doing and you're taking lots of safety precautions. So a written test online is not going to cut it. You're going to have to do some sort of certified Transport Canada pilot test or whatever and meet a bunch of other criteria. If you're using a drone, it's going to have to meet certain criteria. It's going to have to be on their list of approved drones and whatnot. Category 3 is more for complex type operations, which would mostly be people that are in the business of money for flying drones. All right, so I'm going to stop babbling now and I'm going to let Transport Canada explain to you what the 3 categories are. Now, Transport Canada this week had an online conference and you could join it. I joined it. Now, the voice that you're going to hear is coming through a telephone. So it's telephone audio quality and it sounds like NASA. You're going to hear these beeps and blips. I have no idea what the hell that is. But just try to pay attention to the audio as best you can. And this is Transport Canada UAS Task Force explaining the 3 categories. Now, one thing I can say right now is in listening to the conference and listening to people across Canada ask questions, it was very obvious that Transport Canada, the small UAS Task Force group, they're overwhelmed. They do not have all the answers. So going forward, they may make mistakes. Now, it's not uncommon for government to make mistakes, as we all know. So to correct mistakes, they rely on the public. They are very open to anybody providing suggestions and maybe pointing out errors in what they're trying to do. So if you can do that, I've included 2 emails below. And if you do that before the 13th of October, 2017, then before they move any further, they will have all your suggestions. So don't wait too long. Fire those emails off. But for now, here, listen to the boys at Transport Canada explain exactly what the 3 categories are.
For the very small UAS, defined as 250 grams to 1 kilogram again, minimum distances from people in aerodromes, and operating outside controlled airspace. Some things for the pilot, got to be 14 years old, successfully completed a written knowledge exam with a 5-year renewal, so every 5 years you'll have to redo the knowledge exam. Very simple exam to take. It'll be online. Basically 15 to 30 questions. What we're looking for with it is that we're educating the consumer or the user that there are some things that they have to be aware of when they go flying their UAS, and that they're understanding those regulations or some basic regulations about it. 5-year renewal is in line with most of our manned aviation for recurrency as well. So anybody that has an actual pilot's license is required to do something every 5 years to keep themselves up to date with knowledge. One of the ones that we had presented to us from the CARE Act working group or suggested by them was having liability insurance. The $100,000 comes from our minimum required for manned aircraft, so it is in line with all the rest of our regulations, and hence the requirement there. Any aircraft in Canada is required to have the liability insurance, and as UAS are considered aircraft in Canada, hence the requirement there as well. Moving on to the product, some of the things that you have to do is make sure that your name, address, and telephone number is clearly visible on the UAS, and that the UAS is properly maintained with the manufacturer's instructions. And then moving on to operating rules. You must be fit to fly, not suffering from fatigue, and not under the influence of alcohol. When you look at our regs, we actually do include a time frame for alcohol. It is 12 hours. Some people that have pilot's licenses will actually say, know that our current regs for manned aviation is 8 hours, flying is 12 hours. The reason being is that the manned aviation rules will be changing shortly as well. One of the other things that you have to do is if there's an accident or a problem or any damage or injury, you need to stop operations and figure out what happened before you start flying again. And then do not operate in a reckless or negligent manner. It's pretty straightforward. Safe distances, down at the bottom you can see that maximum altitude of 300 feet, within a quarter mile distance of the pilot, and no flights within 3 nautical miles of an aerodrome and 1 nautical mile of a heliport, which is in line currently with our interim order regarding model aircraft. windshield protection for bird strikes. Currently, the regs are for 2 kilograms or 4.4 pounds. But what we found was that the birds are soft and squishy, where the UAVs are hard and crunchy, so to speak, as one of our coworkers likes to say. So when we looked at it, the 1 kilogram is equivalent to 1 kilogram of dense material is roughly equivalent to 2 kilograms of soft and squishy. Hence that one. The altitude rationale as well. In manned aviation, anything over 300 feet needs to be lighted accordingly. So that's where the 300-foot altitude came from. Some people also ask why we don't use the 400 feet that the U.S. uses. In the United States, they actually have an altitude restriction for manned aircraft at a minimum of 500 feet. We don't have that rule in Canada. When you're flying out in the boonies or out away from built-up areas, you are permitted to fly lower as long as you are maintaining 500 feet laterally from any manned or any man-made objects or people. Hence the difference in the altitudes. Moving on to slide 11, very small UAS. We're still into the subparts. They can only operate in Class G airspace with a maximum speed of 25 knots, and no flights over open air assemblies of people. And the weather basically got to stay clear of clouds, and you got to have some good visibility. So this is our 1 kilogram, 5 kilograms, operate at least a half a nautical mile from built-up areas and a specific distance away from airports and not in controlled airspace. Age has gone up to 16. Same thing, got to do a written test online, and then the liability insurance stays the same as well. Same identification, and then the UAS has to be properly maintained as well. And again, maintaining technical records and airtime of flights and maintenance actions and notifications of repairs. That's a little bit of an add-on to the very small category. It's not supposed to be onerous, so you don't have to have the technical manual that you would for manned aviation. It's just keeping some kind of record of what you do with the UAS, how you maintain it, what modifications you make to it. Then the operating rules, in addition to all the rules that were in the very small, you also have to conduct a physical site survey prior to operation. You have to have some kind of procedures in place for pre-flight checks, tests, takeoff and landing checklists. Those kinds of things are what we're looking for. And then emergency procedures as well in place. Some kind of idea of what you're going to do if you have some kind of pilot issue, whether you have an engine failure or structural problem, or if you have a flyaway. So trying to anticipate what are you going to do with that situation and having something in place prior to. And then once again, back down to the safe distances at the bottom. Maximum altitude is 300 again. Visual distance, now we've given you a little bit more leeway. You can fly out half a mile from the pilot or the operator. No flights within that 3 miles around an aerodrome and 1 nautical mile around a heliport. 250 feet minimum lateral distance from people, vessels, and in motion. 500 feet from assemblies of people, and no night operations. And moving on to slide 13, limited operations again, Division 2 requirements. Going through, basically same thing as before. All crew must be trained and proficient and competent, only in Class G airspace. There is an allotment to allow for going over the 300 feet, as long as you maintain 200 feet within horizontal distance of a building or a structure. Then you can go up to the maximum of 100 feet above the object that you're looking at. Easiest way to really think about this one is you're doing tower inspections or building inspections out in the country or wind turbine. Whatever the height of the wind turbine is, as long as you stay 200 feet horizontally to that structure while you're doing the inspection, you can go up to 100 feet above the top of the structure. That fits in line with our manned aviation. Manned aviation is required to keep 500 feet horizontally in any kind of structure, so it gives us a nice to our complex UAS operations, 1 kilogram to 25 kilograms, operating less than half a nautical mile from or within built-up areas, or within controlled airspace and in proximity to aerodromes. What we've done here is for the pilot pillar, we've looked at increasing the age to 16, looking for a higher level of maturity for the operator, have to complete a written knowledge exam and a flight review by a UAS pilot permit holder. Somebody that already has a permit will issue a letter of competency, and then you need to obtain a TC pilot permit. Once we'll go into the details of how to do that a little bit later on in the presentation. And then you have to complete recurrent training program in the last 2 years. So just like our manned aviation, it could be anything as simple as a safety letter that we put out at Transport Canada. You do some questions at the back of it. Some of them will be related to UAS. That is your recurrent training. You can upgrade or change training on a different type of machine. That will satisfy that component. Or if you decide to go into manned aviation, you can get a license or a permit on the manned side, and that will update your recurrent training as well. Same liability requirements. Moving on to the product, slight change here. The UAS has to be registered with Transport Canada, and you will be issued TC marks. And it needs to comply with the design standard, with the declaration of compliance and statement of conformity, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. And the UAS needs to be maintained to the manufacturer's instructions, and if you are planning on operating at night, you will be required to have the UAV lit accordingly for night operations. Operating rules, basically the same as the general and the limited categories. Also on top of that, if you plan on going into controlled airspace, you'll need to coordinate with ATC for that. You'll need to maintain two-way communication with ATC and comply with ATC instructions and clearances. If you fall into this category or you choose to operate in this category, the distances, giving you a little bit higher altitude at 400 feet now. And we've also upped your distance that you can fly from the operator up to 1 nautical mile. And then flights are permitted within 3 nautical miles of an aerodrome, and the heliport is subject to ATC or air traffic control coordination. We reduced the distance laterally and vertically from people and vessels and vehicles down to 100 feet. And we're still at 500 feet from open air assemblies unless you have a minimum height of 300 feet or you can glide safely clear of the crowd. Basically, if you've got a Sense EV, which is a foam fixed-wing UAV, that's going to glide a lot farther, so you could probably get a little lower to the crowd. If you have a quadcopter, you're going to have to be at that 300 feet minimum or at a higher altitude to be able to glide safely in case something happens with your UAV. And night operations are permitted with lighting. A couple of things to touch base on. We have at least 14 UAS that have already met the design standard and are listed on our website. And one of the other ones that we had discussed was we had a lot of questions about grandfathering in people that had UAVs or UASs, and they weren't sure if on the days that the rules are implemented, whether they would be able to operate. Our intention is to give grandfather ability to operators to continue to use their product until they can upgrade to something that is compliant or their manufacturer provides us with the information to make their UAV compliant. So that's one of the things that we've looked at as well. The details of the exact ability for the grandfathering clause, what we've looked at initially was going to the half a mile, going down a half a mile for the visibility or the distance away from the operator, and restricting you down to 300 feet altitude and not in a built-up area or in controlled airspace for the compliant machines that are grandfathered in. So moving on to Division 3 requirements for the complex. You can operate in Class C, D, E, F, and G airspace. That also includes military coordination if it's required for military airspace. No night vision goggles unless using a visual during the night that is not using night vision goggles. And then flight over open air assemblies and persons only if you can glide clear. And over or within built-up area, you must assess the hazards and set up the takeoff and landing area. Weather, we've given a little bit more of a restriction there. Basically, controlled airspace, so we keep it to the same minimums that we have for manned aviation, as they may be operating in the same environment as manned aircraft. At the bottom, you can see if you're flying in this complex operations area, the category, you will be able to fly near airports with ATC coordination, urban areas, rural areas, and in controlled airspace with ATC coordination. One of the things that will not be covered is within the confines of an airport properties. That is going to be something that will require an SFOC to operate. So if you're going to be doing inspection of aircraft on tarmacs or airport buildings, you will be required to still apply for an SFOC due to the requirements for coordination with different stakeholders to get permission to accomplish that. So you can see that these are the privileges that you will get from from the complex UAS operations. Going back to everything else, if you follow the rules, all the rules applying to each of the categories that you're operating in, you will not be required to create an SFOC application. All you have to do is do the stuff that's required and you can go flying. Moving on to the next slide. So basically, we'll run down very quickly through this slide. It runs through how the process is going to work to get your permit or how to go flying. In the very small operations, complete knowledge test, register online for the exam, will confirm your identity, write the online exam, and you pass. You get a certificate. You mark your UAV with all your information. You go follow the rules. You get to go flying. For the limited, same thing. You complete a knowledge test online, pass the test, mark your UAV, follow the rules for that category. You get to go flying. And then in the complex, we have two streams for the complex. Pilot stream, basically the pilot will have to submit for a pilot permit application. They'll do a test, a written test, and then submit a letter of competency to TC. We'll issue a pilot permit. At the same time, with their UAVs, they'll submit an application for a certificate of registration. We'll do a document review. We'll issue a certificate. You mark a UAV with the TC registration. Those two items are done. You go follow the rules, and you get to go